Chapter 19. Gemini. This time, I walked beside Brug as we progressed up the wide hallway. After a few whispers between them, Rashan and Machini grabbed torches off the wall of the knight's quarters. Both could see in the dark, so I presumed they planned to use the torches as deterrents in case enemies got the jump on us. Amelia opted to keep her hands free. If I hadn't had two swords, I might have grabbed one of the spares, despite the minimal damage the torches would do. Amelia shuffled forward, then threw out an arm to halt our progress. "Stop!" I jerked to a halt. "What is it?" Amelia pointed. "Trap ahead." I discovered 11 traps in my time in Enora, as indicated by a discover trap skill of a matching number. But when I squinted in the way I usually did, the usual yellow glow indicating a trap didn't appear. "Where?" "A few feet up. Just there." She indicated the right wall. Despite my determined squint and a direction to search, nothing appeared. Amelia read the frustration in my features. "Your skill probably isn't high enough." My eyelids relaxed and I stood straight, not realizing I'd hunched to search. "You pick locks. You spot high-level traps. Where did you get all these skills?" Amelia's lips curved into what might be mistaken for a smile, but I'd spent enough time with her by then to know it was a sign of empathy, in this case, for my ignorance of her culture. "Since I was 7 years old, my brethren have trained me to serve in the Queen's regiments. By 15, it became apparent my skills as a potential assassin were outweighed only by my accuracy with a bow. Although I'm a ranger, my recent acceptance into the regiment placed me into the Dark Arts Force." "Are you saying you're an assassin?" "I'm your bodyguard. But as it applies to the regiment, yes. I'm an assassin by profession, but not by class." "But I thought Semantia didn't interfere in outside interests. Why would she have assassins?" "I doubt you heard that from the Queen." Amelia shook her head. "Perhaps you should question your sources. But suffice it to say we aren't above acting in our own interests when the Queen deems it necessary. The DA force spies on the governments of Rubal and reports to the Queen. And, when necessary, we solve problems." "Have you ever solved such a problem?" "As you know, I only recently passed the trials. My assignment is to see you aided in your service to the goddess." I twisted my lips to one side as I processed the new information. "Is there a time limit to your service?" "Would I be bound to you if there was?" "So what you're saying is, I'm stuck with you." I couldn't have suppressed the smile crossing my face if I wanted to. The idea of her staying with us indefinitely was great news. "Am I such a burden?" She returned the smile, then reached for a pouch on her white leather belt. She emptied its contents into her palm, balled her fist, then rattled what she held a few times like she planned to roll dice. When she unfurled her fingers, I spied 5 stones of varying size. They lay in a perfect row organized from smallest to largest as if she'd arranged them with the other hand. "Neat trick." Without showing any sign of a response, she pinched the middle stone between 2 fingers, twisted it in her grasp at eye level, then tossed it. The stone clanked against the right wall before rattling to the floor. "Humph." She picked the next largest stone and repeated the gesture. Same result. "Are you trying to trigger?" She hurled the last stone. A burst of fire in the kind of stream I'd expect from a flamethrower shot out of a tiny hole in the wall, then splashed against the opposite wall. The orange heat crept up that side until it reached the ceiling. Amelia tossed the smaller stones up and down in her hand as she watched. When the fire dwindled and burned out, she nodded. "We have to crawl." Brug grunted. Machini passed us by and dropped to her knees. "I'll go first." When she slithered beneath the trap, a fresh burst of flames exploded from the opening, but cleared her by 2 feet. The Cine nudged me with her elbow. "I miss my shield." She dropped, then crawled after her sister. When the rest of us passed, we continued up the hall in silence. Amelia stepped past me, but Brug gripped her arm at the elbow. "Nay, love. What say you walk up front since you've got the eye for this?" She threw me a glance. I nodded, so she shrugged and took the lead. Once her back was turned, I analyzed her and learned her locate trap skill was capped at 195. A little math proved that, With a level of 39, she received a max of 5 locate trap skill points for each level gained. More importantly, with a skill rank of 11, I had work to do. "Amelia?" I called ahead. She answered without looking back. "Yes? Do you think the Queen would allow me to do some of this training with your people?" Her shoulders jiggled as she spoke through sweet laughter. "Can you picture it? A big man like you running around with a bunch of children, learning skills." "I have no ego about the company I keep if an opportunity arises." Her shoulders halted their bouncing and she stopped. "The Queen adores you. I'm certain she would accommodate your request. Make special arrangements to see you made stronger. Would you like me to bring it up on your behalf, or would you engage her directly?" "What's better?" She twisted her lips in that way she did when contemplating. "Approach her yourself. As I said, she holds a fond disposition." My inner face agreed. The Queen's disposition with me was endeared, and only 30 points short of beloved. "I'll do that." She tucked her chin in a bow. "I hope my laughter didn't offend you. The Queen wouldn't look fondly—" I waved a dismissive hand. "The idea of me running around with children to learn skills is funny. Why apologize for it? I'm sure Samantia would understand." She raised her head. "Thank you." A scream echoed down the corridor, and although it was clearer and closer than the warbling reports of earlier, I knew it was the same sound, from the same source. "That's Shoreen's battle cry." "Liatra's angelic?" Machini asked. When I nodded, she charged up the hallway. "Stop!" Brug, Amelia, and I screamed in sync, and the sound bounced off the walls. Machini screeched to a halt. Amelia threw her hands up. "Traps, remember?" Machini's face flushed purple. In the way of an admonished child chastised for running at a swimming pool, she lowered her head and returned to the group. "Sorry." Amelia jogged ahead, setting the pace for the party. We came to a fork where 3 dark tunnels led in different directions. I sighed. "Great." Amelia gazed up each hall and turned, then looked back to us. She thrust a finger toward one hall. "Dicini, a few steps up that hall, then stop." She pointed at the opposite tunnel. "Brug, that one. I'll take the middle. Call out to Liatra." They did. "Dicini?" a reverberating voice replied. "I'm over here. Hurry." We hustled down the corridor where Dicini stood. Amelia took the lead once again. After we rounded a curve, the footing became steep and climbed toward a source of dim light in the distance. Amelia's boots slid to a halt. Brug, who'd followed on her heels, slammed into her. She reeled, dropped into the floor, and vanished. Or rather, I thought she did. At the last moment, Brug snagged her arm around the wrist. I raced forward to find a chasm in the floor, and Amelia's legs swinging wildly over it as she dangled from Brug's grasp. The warrior heaved her up like a feather pillow, then set her on her feet. Amelia slapped a hand to her chest. It rose and fell in short breaths. "I guess this didn't qualify as a trap, huh?" I asked. She doubled over and set her hands on her knees. I peered over the edge. 10 feet below, the skeletal remains of a human form in a tattered robe was impaled on metal spikes. The body was twisted at an unnatural angle, and its feet were missing 2 digits. My heart leapt in my chest and kicked up a new rhythm. Amelia stood beside him and followed his gaze. "You jest when I was nearly impaled." "Sorry, I guess I'm used to your stony disposition." She sighed. "We all have limits." She turned to Brug. "Thanks, big guy." He grunted. I punched his shoulder. "Nice save." But the compliment was ignored. After following Brug's gaze across the chasm, I understood why. It was at least 15 feet across. "Long jump," he muttered. "I can make it with my ranged leap. Amelia's got a jumping ability that should make it. Dicini can charge across if she times it well." He turned to eye Machini. "You got anything like that?" She shook her head. He nodded. "I'll have to throw you." The younger Michonne cocked her head forward. "Throw me? I don't think so." She took 2 giant steps back, got a running start, then launched over the edge. I threw a hand up. "What the hell are you?" Despite the ascending grade of the surface beneath, she sailed through the air like a long jumper, pedaling her legs like she was riding a bike and swinging her arms in much the same way. She landed in a perfect shoulder roll that brought her to her feet. I stared, open-mouthed, and didn't bother finishing my sentence. Destiny followed in a similar fashion. Amelia also leaped across, her feet glowing white right before she jumped. Brug turned. "So, what do you think, my fellow human? Got the legs for that?" I peered across. "Shit." Brug smiled. "Oh, poor chosen one. So I didn't give you wings or something?" He was getting a real kick out of this. "Bite me, barbarian." Brug grinned as he turned his back to the chasm. He crouched, cupped his hands, then cocked his head backward to indicate the gap in the floor. "Get a good start. Plant your foot right here, and I'll heave you." "Shit," I repeated. I eyed his huge hands. Backpedaled, guessing at the range. Brug shook his head. "That's far enough. Stop being such a pup. Your other healer needs help." I gazed back at Rashan, who stood even further from Brug. "What are we going to do about her?" "That'll be my problem. Let's go, Mythic." After one final deep breath, I launched. My arms pumped and quads flexed as my boots pounded the floor. In seconds, I'd planted my foot, pushed off Brug's hands, and sailed through the air. To my credit, I turned my focus toward a soft landing and rolled like a pro. When I turned to look across the chasm, Brug tossed his torch across the gap. Sparks splattered to the ground, but it remained lit. I snatched it up, then spied Rashan stepping back when Brug approached. I couldn't hear what was being said, but the way the priestess shook her head, there seemed to be some disagreement as to the tactics that would send her across. Brug thrust his hands on his hips, then his shoulders dropped. Without warning, he reached out, swept Rashan up into a cradle, and sped toward the chasm. His feet flashed red as he launched into the air. When he impacted, the floor cracked into spidering webs beneath his feet. He set the priestess down, then thumped his chest with one fist. "Told ya!" Rashan punched his shoulder. "Brute!" Brug chuckled. "Step into it and you might cost me a hit point." "Bah!" Rashan stomped past us and up the hallway. Then she set into a jog, reminding me of our current purpose. Liatra. I turned, suppressing laughter. "Rashan? Traps, hun." "Fuck your traps." She raised both hands. A translucent, shimmering shield surrounded her. Amelia hustled ahead anyway. She knew as well as I the shield would only absorb so much damage. I leaned toward Brug and lowered my voice. "Good job." The upward climb continued for about a minute, and we ran the whole way. By the time we reached the end, I was huffing, my stamina meter at 15%. The corridor emptied into a long, narrow room with a wide table in its center. A circular iron chandelier with extinguished candles lining its perimeter hung over the table. Liatra crouched upon the iron ring, her hands grasping the supporting chain. The chandelier creaked. Then cracks in the ceiling high overhead sent dust cascading onto her head. A blanket of the stuff gave off the illusion she had metallic hair. On the table below circled 6 hairy monsters with long fangs and snouts that jutted out a foot from their faces. "Barghest, level 44 Hellhound, strength 109, dexterity 42, intelligence 1, wisdom 1, constitution 124, charisma 1. Liatra's angelic summons swept in a circle around her, casting tiny bolts of lightning that impacted the beasts and made them yip, but seemed to do little more than annoy them. Of course, DPS wasn't Shoreen's forte, and I hadn't even known she could push nature magic. A Barghest leaped into the air and snapped at the angelic, but she zipped to one side and 2 feet higher, easily evading the attack. My primary healer stood straight, then peered up. "Think I could get a little help here?" Brug smirked, then withdrew his sword as if there was no hurry. I yanked both of mine free. "Hey!" Brug growled like a grizzly. The Barghests turned. Drool streamed from the fangs of the largest one in the center of the table. A low growl accompanied it, then its companions joined in, creating an angry chorus. I didn't dare take my gaze from them as I spoke to Brug. "How do you want to do this?" "Well, I'll start with the one in the center. Wait a count of 2 or so, then Destiny can provoke any I miss. You hack away at the others. Seems pretty simple to me." Amelia shook her head in derision. Simple. Nothing is ever simple around Gemini. The Alpha launched. Brug dropped 1 foot back, bent at the knees, drew the pommel of his sword toward his hip, then thrust it into the air and used the beast's own flying weight to impale it. His shoulders bulged when he lifted the Barghest overhead, then slammed it to the floor. 1 boot pinned the carcass, then he ripped the sword free. Brug faced the remaining enemies and flexed both arms. See? Simple. He and Amelia gazed at each other in turn. It might have been comical if not for the healer balanced precariously on the creaking chandelier overhead. Another Barghest growled, then another. 1 crouched to launch, but Destiny zipped across the space and shoulder slammed it. The beast rolled backward and off the table. Another launched toward her, but Brug let out a bellowing war cry that made every monster turn. Chaos followed. In a second, the warrior was surrounded. He swung his sword in violent arcs with 1 hand, then punched with the other. When a beast bit down on his arm, he hefted the creature off the floor. Destiny ran it through with her sword and stood beside Brug. They sliced at the incoming enemies while a whistling sound started behind us, then grew louder. A glowing projectile flew through the air, then exploded against a Barghest's head. An arrow followed it up, then pierced the hellhound's back. When my party had created enough space for me to slip through the crowd, I stepped forward and thrust out both swords. Tenkasuru! Fire streamed up the blades with a whoosh. I turned and backed toward Liatra, sweeping the weapons like torches to keep any enemies back, but their attentions were diverted toward my tanks. When I leaped onto the table, Liatra was already dangling from the circle of iron that held the candles. Step on my shoulders! I braced myself with my fiery blades held out as far as I could push them. She dropped onto my shoulders, then performed a nimble drop onto the table. Once she'd righted herself, she gave me a quick squeeze from behind. Thanks! Then she was off, circling the room to line up next to Rashan near the corridor through which we'd entered. I launched from my perch. As I landed, I brought my primary katana down on the back of an unsuspecting Barghest, drawing a guttural yelp. Even though I'd been aiming for its head and the level difference mechanics might have thrown my aim, the searing line of burning hair and flesh brought no small amount of satisfaction as I brought around my offhand weapon for a follow-up strike. The hellhound wheeled just in time to catch the strike across one side of its ugly, drooling mug, and its left eye sizzled as it lunged. A quick twist to my left, aided by a high dodge skill rank, sent it reeling past. Then I brought down the patented double strike ability of the Shogun. You use encumbering slice. Hit ×2. Barghest, minus 96 HP. Defense down. Minus 20 HP, burn. The defensive debuff would account for any losses to damage from my misshapen aim, and the burn effect was icing on the cake. Smoke rose in 2 tiny plumes from the demon animal's hindquarters. For a little extra touch, I shoved my boot into its backside, then shoved it across the floor toward Brug. The warrior grasped its scruff, hurled it into the air, then punted the hound. Before it hit the floor, he twirled, reversed the grip on his sword, then brought it down on my target in time with the hound's impact with the floor. The weapon split the Barghest's spine at the neck, lopping off its head. Brug has defeated a level 44 Barghest. 4,121 XP. It was like we'd teamed up 1,000 times. Brug locked gazes with another demon dog. It then turned to charge Destiny, who was encumbered with the other 3 as it was. No, don't think so. Brug tilted his head back, flexed the muscles in his arm a second time, then howled. Come to me, pups. Meet your ends. My gods, it was a thing of beauty watching an experienced Enoran combatant like him make the demons his bitch. The Barghests turned, pivoted, then launched as a pack. Brug twisted, bringing his sword all the way back and around, then swung a whooshing blow all the way across his body to slice through 2 of his enemies. He spun again with the sword shoved straight out in front of him, which downed another. The 4th slipped beneath his weapon, turned, and latched on his calf. Ah, fuck all! As I charged in, a whistle sounded, followed by a blue streak shooting through the air that pegged the monster on its backside. The Barghest turned toward Machini, but the taunt Brug uttered proved more powerful than the beast's animosity. It turned back toward the warrior, towering above him as Liatra's angelic summon flew by and fired a blue healing stream toward Brug's injured calf. The flesh knitted itself back together. Then he and I unleashed a bloody fury on the animal's mangy hide. Right when I thought we'd finish it, the animal was cast in a purple glow. Its muscles bloomed as it leaped away and swung around, its claws cutting swaths in the stone. Barghest casts Final Fury. Defense up. Resistance up. Status change. Frenzy. Effect. Plus 100% damage for 10 seconds. Brug, Dicini, and I lined up shoulder to shoulder without discussion, forming a wall before our ranged and healing team. "Keep it tight," Brug said. "See the claws?" I squinted unnecessarily and spied the reflective surfaces of the long blades. It was like the Barghest was an X-Men pet. "That's gonna hurt." The animal launched clean over our heads. "Healers!" I called out in hopes Amelia and Machini would close ranks, but they couldn't do anything. The animal zipped through the air too fast for them. Then it charged Rashan. I cursed under my breath as Dicini readied her taunt, but I knew it was too late. Instead of lunging backward and circling around the group as I'd anticipated, Rashan lunged into a front-leaning stance. She spun her staff in a figure eight, causing a blooming fury of white light. Then she brought it down in the center of the Barghest's head. The demon dog dropped and slid on its belly. Then a well-timed arrow slipped between us. It lodged itself in the animal's head for the kill. Amelia has defeated a level 43 Barghest. 3,798 XP. We circled around the dead beast, staring down at it. Brug kicked it. "Mean bugger." Machini kicked it. "Yup." I gazed up at Rashan. "What the hell was that, priestess?" She gazed absently, the pink in her cheeks slowly draining away. "What? Did you think I was helpless? Just because I let you do all the fighting doesn't mean I'm some pup to be saved. I learned much from my master, and the Elven Prince's monk taught me some new moves." As she marched past me, she slapped her staff onto her back. "Well, it would have been nice to know you could fight back in the Plague Barrens." "The opportunity never arose. Besides, I'm here to heal. I don't seek conflict." Says the woman who saved my life with a dagger in her kidnapper's back. Rashan squinted. "It was not my preference to use a blade, and you know this. Why do you strike out so?" "Because I relish illustrating how you freaking love me." Her chin dropped. Her facial muscles twitched and contorted through multiple expressions I could barely keep up with. Then she stomped forward, gripped both sides of my face, and kissed me. "There. Now everyone knows how I love you." She pranced toward the lone corridor opposite where we'd entered. "She always has to have the last word." Amelia nodded. "I'd noticed. She doesn't talk much, but when she does, you'll damn well hear her."